When we think of Halloween, a variety of animals come to mind. But have you ever wondered why these specific animals have become so deeply entwined with this spooky celebration? Though Halloween as we know it was commercialized in the early 20th century with mass-produced costumes, decorations, and themed treats, the spooky stories of these animals stretch back much further. Their roots are found in ancient mythologies, medieval folklore, and age-old superstitions. This rich history adds depth to the seemingly simple symbols of Halloween, connecting our modern celebrations to the distant past. In this video, we'll unravel the historical and cultural significance behind these animals and discover how myths, legends, and ancient traditions have transformed them into the iconic symbols of Halloween that we know and love today. One of the most common animals seen in Halloween decor is the black cat. This specific coloration of feline has been persecuted for centuries due to its association with evil, particularly witches. Hatred and fear of witches goes back millennia, and in Christian Europe, this fear became linked with cats when Pope Gregory IX wrote the Vox in Rama in the 13th century. In the document, he described a cult that he had heard of from northern Germany that was said to worship Lucifer. These people were believed to have magical powers granted by the devil, and in his letter, he detailed their sinful meetings, writing, "Everyone sits down to a banquet, and when they get up after it's over, a black cat emerges from a kind of statue that is normally found in the place where the meetings are carried out. It is as large as a normal-sized dog, and enters backwards with its tail upright." Pope Gregory made this association between witches and cats intentionally. Black cats were already seen as dark and mysterious, becoming symbols of the unknown. Moreover, cats held significant symbolic value in the beliefs and mythologies of other major civilizations that the Church associated with paganism. The Egyptians worshipped the cat goddess Bastet. Pre-Christian Romans worshipped the goddess Libertas, who was often symbolized by a cat. And the Greeks believed that Hecate, a goddess of the underworld, sometimes punished people by turning them into cats. In 1487, a book that would cement the belief that cats and witches went hand in hand was published. German clergyman Heinrich Kramer wrote Malleus Maleficarum, also known as the Hammer of Witches. In it, he condemned witchcraft as heresy and encouraged the torture of suspected witches to gain confessions and to burn them at the stake. Kramer detailed how witches used familiars to disguise themselves and to travel among common people unnoticed. One such familiar was, of course, a cat. Shortly after the book gained popular support, the Pope endorsed the persecution of witches. According to historian Matilda Jocelyn Gage, this led to around 9 million people, and likely millions of cats, being executed for witchcraft over the next 3 centuries. When Halloween was commercialized at the beginning of the 20th century, witches and black cats were some of the first characters to be adopted into the lore, and the image of the black cat remains an important part of Halloween to this day. Bats are among the spookiest and most iconic symbols of Halloween. But how did they come to be seen as ominous harbingers of darkness and evil? The sight of black winged shapes flitting through the twilight sky is now inseparably linked to Halloween, and this association likely began about 2,500 years ago with the ancient Celts. Across the British Isles and Ireland, a celebration known as Samhain has been observed for millennia. According to legend, on the evening of October 31st, as the harvest season ended and winter arrived, the Celts believed that the ghosts of their ancestors returned to Earth. On this sacred night, spirits would cross over from the beyond and roam the world of the living, causing mischief and mayhem. The Celts celebrated Samhain to protect themselves from these restless spirits. Superstitious and wary, they dressed in costumes made from animal skins and hides, and gathered around large bonfires, offering sacrifices of crops and animals to appease the returning spirits. As the bonfires blazed into the night, their glow and warmth attracted flying insects. These insects, in turn, drew in hungry bats, which swooped and darted through the firelight in search of prey. The dark, shadowy figures of the bats, moving swiftly through the semi-darkness, may have seemed to the Celts like the embodied spirits of the dead, thus associating the bats with death and spirits. Meanwhile, on the European continent, stories of vampires had long existed. Dating as far back as 4,000 years, many countries and cultures had stories of demons or humanoid creatures that fed on the blood of innocent people. In the 11th century, these tales began to gain popularity, and by the mid-18th century, full-on vampire hysteria was taking over Europe. Around this time, Europeans encountered a group of bats in the Americas that lined up quite well with these horrible stories of blood-sucking monsters. The bats would wait until nightfall to swoop down on unsuspecting animals, bite them, and drink their blood. By 1810, they became known as vampire bats, and in 1897, Bram Stoker's Dracula was published. While vampires had been said to be able to take on the form of animals, just like witches, it wasn't until Dracula that the idea of vampires turning into bats specifically became popularized. Over time, bats became a staple in Halloween decor and media, being featured in movies, books, and haunted houses around the world. Another animal often associated with Halloween is the spider, but their connection isn't due to being tied with a specific monster like a witch or a vampire, but rather thanks to their ecology. While spiders may make an appearance as an ingredient in a witch's magical concoction, in scary stories, they tend to show up more in haunted houses or dark cellars than anywhere else. The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, published in 1898, is one of the earliest works of literature featuring a haunted house with ghostly apparitions. Then in 1904, M.R. James published his work The Ash Tree, a ghost story about a man who inherits a house with a haunted tree infested with monstrous spiders. The association of spiders with haunted houses reached the mainstream level in the 1930s, when a fad among youths meant that pranks on the public were getting out of hand, particularly around Halloween. Communities needed an activity to keep these young people occupied, and haunted houses began to pop up all over the place. With spiders and cobwebs being a common sight in abandoned places, they played an important role in creating the spooky ambiance. Spiders are also just naturally scary to people. Studies have shown that humans have evolved a fear of creatures with 8 legs. There are many species of venomous spiders and scorpions around the world that our ancestors have learned to avoid. Over time, our brains have evolved to steer clear of them. Combine this with their unpredictable movements, often hairy bodies, and abundant eyes, and it becomes clear why the human brain has a natural fear of spiders. On top of this, outside of the tropics, the life cycle of spiders is closely tied to the seasons. They generally hatch in the spring, spend the summer growing, and by fall finally reach their full size. Thus, spiders are also most visible in the autumn, just in time for Halloween. Of course, the majority of this fear is undeserved. Less than 0.1% of spider species are potentially harmful to people, and their consumption of flying insects actually plays an incredibly beneficial role in the environment and in the lives of people. Halloween also has a select list of birds associated with it. Owls, crows, and ravens are commonplace in Halloween lore and decor today. Owls have a long history of symbolism in cultures around the world. To the Greeks, they were symbols of wisdom linked with the goddess Athena. The Celts also saw owls as wise animals, but they added an additional layer to their mythology. Being nocturnal, owls were extremely mysterious to the Celts. They believed that owls were guardians of the night and had the ability to speak with the gods and pass between the realms of the living and the dead. In some myths, they were said to possess mystical powers associated with death and the afterlife. As Samhain was adapted into the church calendar and eventually morphed into Halloween, the owl has remained an important figure in its lore and mythology. If you've ever been out walking at night and heard the call of a barn owl, you know how frightening it can be. Barn owls have a call that sounds almost like a distant scream. Ravens and crows are also common sights around Halloween. While they aren't nocturnal like owls, their habit of eating carrion has meant that they have been linked to death and decay for thousands of years. In many cultures, crows and ravens are omens of death, including among the Celts. Crows and ravens played a part in Samhain beliefs as well. They were psychopomps that led the souls of the dead to the afterlife. Already carrying a bad reputation, ravens and crows were quickly associated with witchcraft and sorcery in medieval times. The birds were some of the many familiars said to be used by witches. Ravens were also believed to be used by witches to gain arcane knowledge, being sent out with evil intentions by witches and wizards alike. In Victorian times, there was a growing obsession with the macabre. In Edgar Allan Poe's work, The Raven, this dark and mysterious bird visits the narrator at a time of profound grief and serves as a symbol of mourning and despair. It brings a feeling of dread and melancholy to the poem, appearing at midnight, a time traditionally associated with the supernatural. Wolves have long been entwined with the legends of Halloween, drawing on a rich tapestry of mythology and folklore. As powerful predators roaming the dark forests, wolves have always plagued people with fear, despite the fact that attacks on people have rarely occurred. Just like other animals the Celts encountered, wolves too played into the lore of Samhain and were seen as guardians of the space between the living and the dead. The transformation myth of werewolves has roots that run deep across European folklore. The concept of werewolves first gained significant traction in ancient Greece and Rome. Stories abounded of individuals cursed by the gods to live as wolves due to their wickedness or offenses. These early tales set the stage for the medieval werewolf legends that would later haunt Europe. During the Middle Ages, tales of werewolves became widespread, fueled by superstition and fear of the unknown. These stories often featured men who transformed into wolves during the full moon, haunting and terrorizing the night. This was at the same time as the rise of witch hunts and the European fascination with demonic forces on Earth. In 1589, the case of Peter Stump, who was also known as the Werewolf of Bedburg, became infamous. Stump was accused of cannibalism and witchcraft, and he claimed that he could transform into a wolf. His grisly tale, along with others like it, cemented the werewolf as a symbol of horror. The association of werewolves with Halloween grew in the modern era, particularly through literature and popular culture. In 1933, the novel The Werewolf of Paris by Guy Endore popularized the werewolf myth in North America. This was further solidified by the release of Universal Pictures' 1941 film The Wolf Man, which established many of the werewolf tropes still seen today, such as the belief that men would transform into werewolves under a full moon. The haunting howls of wolves, paired with the eerie legends of werewolves, continue to be spooky symbols of Halloween today. And that concludes our journey through the eerie animals of Halloween. Do you know of any other fascinating animal legends tied to the holiday? Tell us about it in the comments below. I want to say a special thanks to my patrons. Without their ongoing support, I wouldn't be able to produce a video like this every week. If you want to support the channel, check out the link in the video description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.